Hello, everyone. So today we're going to look at the sphere Netzach on the Hermetic Tree of Life. And this is by me, Nicholas O'Donnell, or Frater CMVM. So first I want to give complete respect to the women in the esoteric community. This is a male-dominated topic, and for any woman that decides to embark on this path, I give full respect to. You guys deserve way more respect and recognition than what the community gives you. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for bringing us all into life. I'm a firm believer that our universe is dominated by feminine energy. We all come from the mother. So even plants, animals, everything. So first, I want to talk about how psychology, philosophy, and religion are all the same. Well, they're not the same, but they arise out of the same ideas. Now, here we have a almost like a Venn diagram here on the left-hand side, showing how religion, philosophy, and science or psychology shapes our worldview. So the way that we perceive things is perspective, and the way that we educate ourselves around religion, philosophy, and science create a perspective or a worldview of how we perceive to be truth or perceive to be reality. So whatever we fill our minds with, that is how we're going to perceive the world. Now, another point that I would like to make is that philosophy arose out of religion. So first there was religion, and then philosophy arose out of religion, and then psychology came from philosophy. So about 200 years ago, people started to study the mind and the science of the mind, and it was grouped with philosophy. And then eventually enough studies started to come out where they kind of distinguished that what they were actually studying was completely different than philosophy, although it was slightly related. So they called it psychology, which is now the study of the mind. And I feel slightly like I am able to talk about these things because I am going to school for religious studies and psychology. So this is the Kabbalistic tree of life, or the Hermetic tree of life. And here we have all of the spheres, and we have the tarot cards laid over it. And these are all the paths. Now, the first three dots, or the first three spheres on this tree, you can see them here: the crown, understanding, and wisdom. They are basically intellectual. Okay, so if we think about wisdom and understanding, those are both intellectual things. They have to do with intellect. All right. Now, there is this thing that I call the eternal mind, and it basically is what thought of our reality, and then it was bound by this law. But that's neither here nor there. But basically, up here we have this like eternal mind stuff that is basically thinking of the patterns that we have for our reality. So I like to also call it the upper triad. Okay, so it's like basically the Godhead. Okay, the Godhead is up there, and they're defined by wisdom and understanding, which are both intellectual processes. So we have here again the tree, and if we kind of look at all the spheres, we have understanding, wisdom, severity, mercy, and then splendor and victory. Now, if you notice, as we go down the tree, splendor and victory start to actually turn into more emotional phenomena. So, splendor obviously has to do with feeling good, and victory actually is the perception of winning over on something, or it's the perception of passing a certain test, to be victorious, to come into something. Now, victory and splendor insinuate a relationship to emotion, because when we win or we overcome something or we are victorious, insinuates a emotional experience. Okay, so we have a reflection here. Now, everything on the tree, if you were to fold the tree in half, the along this line here of strength between severity and mercy, actually wisdom would be on victory and understanding would be on splendor. So the tree actually folds itself, it folds onto itself. Okay, so they reflect each other just in different aspects. Now, it's also thought that up here in the upper triad is thought that it's not as dense as down here. So basically, the Godhead is invisible, like an invisible force, while these are more tangible forces. Like this is called the material triad. And we'll get into that in a moment. Just know that it folds and reflects onto itself, and reflection isn't necessarily what the original substance was, although it is related. So, desire. Now, Netzach is basically it's associated not only with emotion, and I feel like sometimes when I talk about this sphere, I just say it's emotion, but actually what it represents is desire. Now, if we think about the psychology of intellect for a moment and human experience, our intellect and our emotions actually influence each other. Okay. Now, think about this. I'm going to give you guys a tangible representation here. When we meet somebody, we think that they are good. We think that they will do good things. Now, they're doing great. They're doing great. They're helping people. And then they go and somebody says, oh, Tom just went and he stole $100 from Susie. Now, originally we had a good feeling about Tom, or we thought good about Tom. We thought Tom was doing good things, but then we learned something, a piece of fact, which is an intellectual thing about Tom. Now, that intellectual fact changes how we feel. Now, let's think about somebody we love. We fall in love with somebody and we are deeply engrossed in how we feel about them. And then we learn something new, and that changes the way that we feel. Now, feelings can also change the way that we perceive something or intellectually think about something. Say we're studying a new topic or we are reading a book and we don't like the book, but the book is said to be really good and to change how we think. So so as we're reading, we don't like it, we don't like it, we don't like it. That's going to skew how we intellectually intake the information. So they're intertwined. Emotions and intellect are intertwined, and that's why we see that reflection on the upper triad. So desire is perspective, making truth subjective. So when we desire something, it is pushing our thinking and feeling into a certain direction. Now, we don't desire something, we are not going to put energy into it. But there is a caveat to that, and we'll get into that in a little bit later. So desire is simply perspective, making truth subjective. So all truths are subjective. And we can see this in religion, philosophical points of view, basically everything. What we perceive to be true is completely subjective. The Jews perceive that Jesus was not the Messiah, but Christians perceive Jesus as the Messiah. Those are two separate truths. And they're two separate perspectives, which thus makes it subjective. So truth is the act of implementing intellectual and experiential perspective. So each one of these religious philosophies or these religious outlooks, they implement intellectual and experiential perspective to prove, to try to show others that their truth is real, or their truth is the one. Now, this isn't what it seems. And as we go on into the presentation, we're going to show that actually nothing is really true. And its own truth is what we desire to perceive. Now, let's see what we got going on here. I might make another one here. So yeah, let's go back one slide. So I want to make one more point on this slide. So actually, the relationship between splendor and desire is that the intellect sends desire into action. So if we were to look back up the tree, we have Hod or splendor, which is represented by intellect, and victory, which is desire. Now they play off of each other. If we desire to know something, we will push desire into intellect. If we want to know something, we will take our intellect and place it into desire. So we're getting back to that emotion intellect dance that we were talking about. So yeah, let's keep going. Oh, and the material world with the density of the lower triad, I got that from McGregor Mats' book, Kabbalah Unveiled. So in the Golden Dawn grades, this path between Tiferet and Netzach is actually the initiation grade, where you go from the outer order into the inner order. Now, the path is the path of noon, which is death. And the death card is called the imaginative intelligence. Now, as I said, this is the path where the outer order becomes the inner order, and it's through noon or death. And so basically, when you're in the outer order, you're refining your knowledge, okay? And you're refining how you think and how you operate, but you're also refining the aspects of your ego. So death basically is the void of the material world. And to go from the outer order to the inner order, you have to throw your ego and your intellect into the void of basically nothingness, so that you can meet your holy guardian angel or become closer to God. As long as we hang on to ego and what we perceive to be true, there will be no way that we can attain the heights of true awareness. Now, this is a very Buddhist concept, and as you get more into esotericism and you get more into Western alchemy and you get more into tarot, basically any Western esoteric ideology, and you're versed in Buddhism, you will start to see a vast correlation between Buddhist philosophy and Western esotericism. So basically, this path has to do with knowing when to bow down to the void. Okay, knowing when to let your ego go, let your intellect go, and basically take a knee to your higher self, to the higher powers at be. Otherwise, you will never make it to the inner sanctuary. So, macroscopic thinking. So, a lot of times we get caught up in basically what all this stuff means on a macroscopic level, and I've kind of already talked about what it means on a microscopic level and how we can apply it to our everyday life, with how our desires and our intellect or emotion and intellect dance off of each other, and how they actually create like an illusion between each other. And so, and like, if you're madly in love with somebody, you won't believe what somebody else says about them, and vice versa. We've already talked about that. So on a macroscopic level, and a lot of people get caught up in macroscopic thinking, we need to be able to take these macroscopic concepts and apply them to everyday life. Like, because we're in the modern age. If we can't do that, then this stuff is not really applicable. So on a macroscopic level, this basically represents the desires of God to push the intellect into a certain way. So if we're going down the tree, it's the light of Tifereth being received by Netzach. So Tifereth shines into Netzach because we have 6th and 7. And then it's thrown into the intellect of Hod. So basically the light of God desires to drive the intellect of Hod into a purified state. Okay, so it's the relationship and the refinement of the light through the purification of desire. And we can see that with the tarot cards, the Fool with the white rose, and then we can also see the white rose on the Death card. So it's all interrelated. So truth is subject to feeling. Okay. So as I was saying, we are madly in love with somebody, and somebody says, I just saw, okay, let's give an example. So you're a female and you are in love with Joe. Okay, Joe is a pretty androgynous name. So you're in love with Joe, whether female or male. Doesn't matter what you are. You could even be transgender. But anyway, so you are in love with Joe. Now, one of your friends comes up and says, I just saw Joe with Tabitha, and they were holding hands and kissing. Now, you're in a monogamous relationship. So that way, that truth from that person will subject how you feel about Joe. Okay, that will change how you feel about Joe. So that will also change your desire to want to be with Joe, because usually people, when they find out their partner's cheating, it changes their desire to be with them. It doesn't change the desire, it changes the perspective of desire. Okay, so truth is subject to feeling. Now let's go back to religion for a moment here. Islamic people, or people that are Muslim, they feel the truth is through the path of the Quran. Okay, the Jews believe or feel that their truth is the Old Testament, and we can look at the Christians or the Buddhists. So that feeling or desire that they have is their truth. So truth is subject to feeling. And this is why Netzach sits higher up on the tree than the intellects of Hod, because it is desire or emotion or feeling that influences how we think. Even if we know that something is the right thing to do, if we don't feel like we should do it, we probably won't, unless there's something else influencing that. And then we'll get to that in a moment here. And if we don't, I'll talk about it at the end of the presentation. So another thing I wanted to talk about. So let's get a biblical teaching in here, because most modern religions are based off the Bible. And if you didn't know this, even Islamic people believe in the Judaic and Christian Bible. They just added, basically the Quran is the third testament. It's the third book that's added to these biblical teachings. And I have a copy of it here. I've been listening to it on audiobook. It's very interesting. So God rested on the 7th day. Rest actually, in fact, is an experience, and it is the description of the lack of emotion. It's the lack of emotional action. So it's the desire to take a break. Okay. There's a reason that victory is also associated with desire. Victory is perspective. It's the perspective of overcoming something. So is failure. Failure is perspective. A failure to one person is a victory to another. This is all subject to what we perceive to be true. So even in the acts of rest, desire is still active. Somebody that's lazy, they desire to be lazy. Okay? we're getting into some cognitive behavioral stuff now. They desire to be lazy. So the idea is if you change how you think and feel, you can change your behavior. So a lack of luster for work still insinuates a motive of desire. Okay, so rest is the lack of luster for work, and it still insinuates the motive of desire, the motive to feel. We feel rest. Okay, we don't think rest, we feel rest. I mean, you can think rest, but you are still desiring to think about rest. So God directed his superconscious intellectual powers to create the patterns of the stars and then desired to rest. Rest implies oblivion or the void of Buddhism. So as I was stating earlier, I have a Kabbalistic tree right here. So if I look over and looking at it. So rest implies oblivion or the void of Buddhism. Now, as I was saying, that path in between Netzach and beauty is the void. It is the void. I mean, if you think about it, do we really know what is after death? No, this is all speculation. All these teachings about the soul reincarnating, everything, it's subject to a truth. It's subject to belief. Nothing, if you think about it, nothing is real. It's either all real or none of it is real. It's all fragmented. It's all fragmented truths, and it's all about perception. Thus, bringing us back to a failure for one person is a victory to another. This reminds me of the phrase, one man's trash is another man's treasure. So let's move on. So let's talk about the desires of the 7's. Now, I'm going to stand corrected. Netzach is not about just emotion, okay? And I think on one of somebody else's YouTube video, I was saying it's about emotion, blah, blah, blah. It's actually about desire. And desire is, it's the underbelly of emotion, okay? It's the underbelly of emotion. We don't desire to feel bad, but it's that desire for the universe to express itself that makes us feel bad. So if we look at all of these cards, okay, we look at the wands, we look at the cups, we look at the swords, and we look at the pentacles, we have a luster for desire. Now, I'll say a few words about each card. So the 7 of Wands desires to hold his ground, all right? He's fighting off all these wands. He wants to hold his ground. Now, the 7 of Cups, it's the wish card, right? What do you want? What do you desire? The 7 of Swords, the man is desiring to take away the swords, okay? So the 7 of Pentacles, sorry, I was glancing at my notes. So the 7 of Swords, he's desiring to steal the swords from the camp, all right? There's lots of different ways we can interpret this card, but I just see desire. So the 7 of Pentacles, he's desiring to grow fruits. He's desiring to grow the bean bush. Now, everything about these cards totally represents desire, all right? So with every tarot card, there's these things called the Lords of. So we have the 7's as the 7 of Wands is the Lord of Valor. The 7 of Cups is the Lord of illusionary success. The 7 of Swords is the Lord of unstable effort. And then 7 of Pentacles, we have the Lord of Failure. Now, as I was saying, desire and truth is subjective. So what somebody considers to be valor, success, effort, or failure is completely perspective. You know, somebody's effort in one subject might be good for them, but is inadequate for another. Let's look at math or some very advanced statistics or calculus. Those subjects are a little bit hard for me, but somebody else, and I might put in a ton of effort, and somebody else might look at my work and say, hey, you didn't put enough effort into that. You didn't desire it enough. But for me, I did. Now, I really like the Seven of Cups, illusory success. Success is an illusion. This entire sphere is about illusion, and we're going to touch on that here in a couple of slides. Everything about this sphere represents the desire to enter the void of truth. And the truth is a void because as humans, we won't ever know the complete truth, only fragments of it, and that's what makes it subjective. So victory is an experience of perception. And when we have intellectual insights, it feels good or bad. So we're talking about the sphere of splendor. Okay, so we think something and it can make us feel good. We can think something, it can make us feel bad. Now, this is just basic psychology. What we think is what we're going to do. It's been proven that people that have a negative mindset will be more prone to depression, suicide. What they are thinking is what they're going to do. As I said in the very beginning, religion, philosophy, and psychology, they're all intertwined. And the more that I go down this path, I see that they're really just pointing at the same thing, just in different ways. So truth is subject to perception. Somebody look at the different religions of the world. I've been talking about this the entire presentation. Now, reality is what feels right. So your reality is completely different than my reality. And that's what makes it separate for victory. My victory is going to be completely separate than your victory. But if you get deep enough, you'll realize that it's just a void. It's a void of truth. Truth is very interesting because it seems like it's projecting outward, but it's really sucking you in. So I have a theory that the 10 Commandments were actually just Moses simply peering into his feelings and then was contacted by God. Now, if we look at the 10 Commandments, don't steal, don't kill, those are all things that make people feel bad. So that's what I wanted to talk about there. I do want to go back to this slide, though, and I do want to add a practical teaching that we can employ in everyday life here. We may not think or feel something is right, but still desire an outcome. So when we go to work, we may not think or feel that our boss is doing something right, but we still desire the outcome of the paycheck. So we're going to do it anyways. So it's weird because the underbelly of thinking and feeling is desire. And it's so interesting. Like, desire is like a makeshift of willpower. And the more that I get into esotericism and spirituality and philosophy, I just realize that all these things that we're thinking about are just aspects of this thing called the intellectual will. Okay, talk about Moses. Here we go. This is what I was just talking about. Desire is an intellectual willpower. So the more that I study this stuff, the more I realize that desire is simply just an intellectual willpower, or not desire, but everything in our reality is just the eternal intellectual willpower. So it neither had a beginning, it neither had an end. And it basically just recombines itself in different ways and in different fashions to express this like eternal will and eternal mind. And so it's through its desire to manifest that we are experiencing what we are experiencing. It's just in different forms. So McGregor Mats says in his book, The Kabbalah Unveiled, that Netzach is firmness, which can actually be correlated to belief. So when we have a belief, we are firm in that belief. And firmness is the desire to believe in something. It's the desire to pursue something. We are locked in place. We are set in stone. That is our belief. That is what we perceive to be true. And so that is what we're going to desire to manifest as truth. So now I want to talk a little bit about the powers of Venus. Now, Venus is associated to Netzach. And I'm just going to name off 3. Money, beauty, and love. Now, these are all things that we desire. We desire to have wealth. We desire to have beauty. We desire to have love. Okay. So, what's interesting is that Venus, and I got this from the Mystic Kabbalah by Dion Fortune, that Netzach is actually represented by a rose. Now, we can see the rose in the Fool, the Magician, Death, the Hierophant, and Strength. Now, all these things are aspects of desire. The fool desires to go on his journey. The magician desires to manifest things. Death desires to take physical life away. The Hierophant desires to get closer to God, and Strength desires to basically push forward and reproduce itself. So this is like the underbelly of the operation of all those things. And all of those cards have a rose in it. The Fool and the Death card actually have the white rose, which represents the purification of desire, which we talked about with the path in between Netzach and beauty, and basically going from the outer order to the inner order in the Golden Dawn through throwing your ego and what you perceive to be true into the void. So Netzach is also assigned to, in the Zephyr Yetzirah, is assigned to the occult or the hidden intelligence. Okay, so the mystic strives to unify in ecstasy with God or the holy guardian angel, which is occult in nature. So these things, God, what we perceive to be God, what we perceive to be the holy guardian angel, are occult. They're hidden. They're hidden aspects of what we perceive to be reality. And what makes this even more interesting is that the chariot, number 7, is also called in the Zephyr Yetzirah. Actually, in that one, it's Het, what they assign the letter Het. It is the house of influence associated with receptivity and will. So here we go. We receive truth. We will truth to be into existence, or what we desire to be truth. So Dion Fortune's Mystical Kabbalah, if you haven't read this book, this is probably one of the best books written on Hermetic Kabbalah, hands down. Her book, Mystical Kabbalah and the Kabbalah Unveiled by McGregor Mats, some of the best books on Kabbalah you could probably read for the modern age. So Netzach, and this is a quote directly from her book, Netzach represents the instincts and the emotions they give rise to, and Hod represents the concrete mind. Although this definition is good, the definition of desire may be better, as we desire to uncover the occult aspects of the material world. Plato's archetypes of perfection. So there's really only archetypes of perfection or things in our reality, and there's only catness, there's only chairness, there's only things that are like what we are perceiving them as. So nothing is concretely perfect. And as perfection is also subjective reality. So the perception also correlates. So perception also correlates to truth. So there's no things that are truth. There's only things like the truth. We will never know the whole truth, but we can desire to know aspects of the truth. Now we will only see fragments of the truth rather than the whole truth. This is what perceived as truth as is subject to desire. We will only see the truth that we want to see. We will only see the truth that we desire to see. So the human intellect is imperfect. There is neither a whole truth nor any truth. The best way to understand the world and how things work is to accept other people's truths and try to see how they're perceiving them. And that is through the annihilation of ego. As soon as you think you know everything and you don't agree with somebody, you are basically inflating your ego, and you are disconnecting yourself from the complete truth. So there's either a whole truth or there is no truth at all. And being able to see others, what they perceive to be true, opens a door into a bigger truth for yourself. So our human intellect is imperfect, okay? And when you start to perceive how others think, you are seeing a bigger part of the truth. So that is the presentation, and I hope I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for listening.